Hi, welcome to the devlog of Journey of Color. This devlog will be handling the topic of the dash. So, a quick little summarization of why we have a dash in our game. Well, we have two characters with two sets of abilities, and one character is mainly focused on maneuvering and player movement, which is why we have a dash as one of those abilities for that character. So I was tasked to create the code for the dash of the player. So I started thinking, technically, what is a dash? Well, a dash is basically like a force that pushes the player for a little while. Like for a split second, you sort of make the player zoom by for a quick little second. So that brought me to how do I code that? And I mean, eventually I got the hang of it, but there's been some struggle while coding the dash, to say the least. Because when something doesn't work, you just do it again and again and again and again until it works. Not really, there's some minor differences, but we'll get into that. So the first version I created was a little bit messy. For example, we had the input in the fixed update, which don't put input in the fixed update. That is mainly for physics and other stuff. Input, player input, you really want to do that in the main update so that it counts every frame. Because in this version, it got a little bit delayed and stuff, and so the player input just didn't feel correct. Also, this was also a little bit of a problem. Not necessarily a bug, but while dashing, you still have a force that pushes the player, but the player, if he dashes in the air, would fall down because of gravity. So, if those little bugs, I went on to the second version. So in the second version, I obviously put the input in the main update, where also the timers are, in order to keep track of when you can dash and how long you can dash. And furthermore, in order to sort out the problem that the player wouldn't fall, I also put some constraints on the rigid body of the player for while the player is dashing. However, this caused a multitude of different problems, because if you change the constraints on a rigid body, that overrides the current constraints you have in the editor, which basically means that if you constrain something that normally isn't constrained, then you'd have to change that later by putting another constraint, putting it back the way it was before. So that got a little bit messy. I mean, technically this function and this version of the dash is still functional, but it's not the cleanest, and so I want to improve it some more. So in this third version, instead of using constraints, I used the boolean in the rigid body, use gravity, because if that's off, then the player won't be affected by gravity at the moment. At first, the player was sliding all around because I temporarily put the gravity off, but I discovered that this is because you should really very much so turn the gravity back on as soon as you can, because without any gravity there's no friction on the ground and obviously no gravity. Furthermore, we restricted the player's movements during the dash, so that he can't walk back while dashing. This was a little bit of a, I wouldn't necessarily say problem, but it was very unclean how you could basically walk out of a dash. So that got fixed in this version. Furthermore, we also checked if the player wasn't floating, because if it was floating, it shouldn't be able to dash at the same time, because the float is meant to be able to stay in one place and kind of float there for a second, so it shouldn't be able to zoom past while floating. few problems, well, mainly just one problem with this third version of the dash is that it was very imprecise to kind of tweak the proportions of the dash force and the duration, because the more duration, the more forces will be added upon each other, and the more the force, the farther you'll go in the duration, obviously. So when you were changing one of the variables, most likely you'd have to tweak the other as well. And it never quite felt right, and was very imprecise on how far you'll actually go, because with forces it also takes into account of other forces affecting the player at the moment. So that led us to our fourth version, where some teammates and we looked at some more tutorials on how other people implement their dashes in their games. We found a very simple yet effective solution is to basically change the position of the player manually and then burp to that position. So basically in the dash you have a variable which is the distance you'd like to dash, and that just gets added to the player's position or gets subtracted from the player position depending on which way you're looking. And with that, it basically just lurks you to that spot and is very precise in the distance traveled in a dash. Also, you could manually change the lurping speed, which also is very easy to change the duration without changing how far you'll go. My advice, if you're trying to do a dash, very much look up tutorials, because I didn't for a while and it really set me back on creating this final, very effective solution. And if you're not able to fully understand or get things right, you could always try asking others for help and advice. I know there are lovely people out there who would love to help. My advice for a dash is try to implement it the same way we had in the end, because it's very clean and it's very precise. I'll also link some other tutorials on how to dash in the description, so if you're curious or if you're wanting to code a dash in your game, be sure to check those out. Anyway, that's basically all I have to say for this devlog, so I'll see you when I see you. Goodbye.